My name is Sarah Williams. I'm 26 years old and I live in Seattle. 3 days from now, I was supposed to get married to the man I love. But instead, I am sitting alone in a hotel room, replaying the moment my entire life collapsed in front of 200 people. It happened at my rehearsal dinner. What was supposed to be the happiest night of my life turned into a public destruction. Because my future mother-in-law stood up, smiled at me, and said one sentence that changed everything. Before Sarah becomes part of this family, she needs to tell the truth about the child she abandoned. At first, I actually laughed, because it sounded insane. I don't have a child. I never had a child. But nobody else laughed. Not my fiancé, not my parents, not even the guests. Everyone just stared at me like I was already guilty. And in that exact moment, I realized something terrifying. Someone had been planning this for a long time, and I had no idea what they were about to destroy inside my life. Before all of this, my life looked normal from the outside. I worked as an interior designer in a small firm downtown. Nothing fancy. Just sketches, client meetings, deadlines, and coffee that always went cold before I finished it. But I liked my life. It was simple, predictable, safe. And after growing up in a strict household where everything had rules, safety was something I valued deeply. I met Ethan Miller 2 years ago. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He was just steady. The kind of man who listens more than he speaks. We met at a charity event where I was helping design the stage setup. He was there with his company sponsors. I accidentally spilled coffee on his shirt. I still remember his first words. "That's a bold design choice. Or revenge." I laughed so hard I almost cried. That was the beginning. From that moment, Ethan became my calm place in a world that always felt too sharp. He never pressured me, never controlled me, never made me feel small. And when he proposed last year, it wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was simple. A quiet dinner, a small ring, and a promise that felt real. For the first time in my life, I believed I was safe, but I didn't know. Safety is the first thing toxic people destroy. It started small, almost invisible. My future mother-in-law, Linda Miller, was polite in the beginning. Too polite. She smiled too much, asked too many personal questions, and always remembered things I never told her. At first, I thought she was just involved, caring. But slowly, the tone changed. One evening at dinner, she looked at me and said, "Ethan has a complicated past. I hope you're ready for everything that comes with him." I remember laughing nervously. "What do you mean?" She just smiled. "You'll see." That was it. No explanation, no clarity, just a warning disguised as kindness. After that night, small things started happening. My messages with Ethan were suddenly mentioned in conversations I never shared. My personal details were brought up by people who shouldn't know them, and every time I questioned it, I was told I was overthinking, that I was insecure, that I was imagining things. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The rehearsal dinner was held at a high-end restaurant near the waterfront. Soft lights, elegant tables, carefully planned decorations. Everything looked perfect, like a dream. I wore a simple silver dress Ethan loved. He held my hand under the table, and for a moment, I actually believed nothing could go wrong. Then Linda stood up. She tapped her glass lightly and smiled at me. Not warmly, not kindly, but like someone about to deliver a verdict. "I want to say something important about my future daughter-in-law." The room went quiet. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Something in her voice didn't feel normal. She turned toward me, and then she said it. "Before Sarah becomes part of this family, she needs to explain why she abandoned her child." Silence. Complete silence. My brain stopped processing words for a second. "What?" I whispered. A few people laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of joke. But Linda didn't laugh. Ethan didn't laugh. Nobody laughed. Instead, he slowly looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes I will never forget. Confusion, distance, doubt. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. Linda reached into her purse slowly and pulled out an envelope. She placed it on the table like it was evidence in court. Then she said, "I didn't want to do this tonight, but the truth shouldn't be hidden." My hands started shaking. "I don't understand what you're talking about." She opened the envelope and slid out photographs. Pictures of a woman, a child, and a man standing beside them. My heart stopped, because the man looked like Ethan. But it wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone who looked similar enough to create confusion. Linda's voice stayed calm. "This is the life you left behind." My voice cracked immediately. I have never seen these people in my life. But nobody responded. People were whispering, looking at me, judging me. And I could feel my entire future shifting in real time. Then Ethan finally spoke, quietly. "Sarah, is this real?" That question, that one question, was the first crack in everything I thought was stable, and I didn't know how to answer. The night I thought I was stepping into marriage, I was actually stepping into a setup I never saw coming. And the worst part? The real truth hadn't even started yet. After the rehearsal dinner ended, no one celebrated anything. There was no laughter, no congratulations, no excitement for the wedding anymore. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy, like something broken inside a house that can't be repaired. Ethan drove me home that night. We didn't hold hands. We didn't talk much. We just sat in the same car, like two strangers sharing the same direction but not the same reality anymore. When we reached my apartment, I waited for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. Instead, he just said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And then he left. No kiss, no reassurance, no "I love you," just distance. That was the first night I understood something painful. Love doesn't always end loudly. Sometimes it disappears quietly, in hesitation. Inside my apartment, I finally collapsed. Not dramatically, not screaming, just sitting on the floor near the door, staring at nothing. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from friends. "What happened? Is everything okay?" People are talking. But I couldn't reply. Because how do you explain something you don't understand yourself? I replayed every moment again and again. The photos, the envelope, the child, the man who looked like Ethan, the silence in the room, and Linda's calm voice. The truth shouldn't be hidden. But there was no truth, only confusion. And confusion is the most dangerous weapon when used correctly. I whispered to myself, "This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense." But sometimes life doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to feel believable. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. Something inside me refused to accept what happened. Not because I was in denial, but because I knew my life. I knew my past. And none of it matched what I was accused of. So I did something I never thought I would do. I started investigating. I opened my laptop and searched for the name from the photos. The man Linda showed. I typed slowly, "Daniel Reeves, Seattle." Nothing. No matching results. No records. No social media. Nothing that confirmed he existed in the way she described. I tried again. Different variations. Still nothing. My heart started beating faster. That was the first crack in her story. Because real people leave traces, even small ones. But this man? He was almost erased. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. "Ethan." My hands shook before I even answered. "Hello?" A pause. Then his voice. Tired. Conflicted. "Can we meet?" My heart tightened. "Yes. Of course." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near the river. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting alone, staring at his coffee like he didn't even notice it. For a second, I just stood there watching him. This man who used to smile at me like I was home now looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want to exist. I sat down slowly. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he finally said, "I checked something." My stomach dropped. "What did you check?" He looked up at me, and I saw it. Confusion mixed with fear. "That man in the photos. I can't find him either." My breath stopped. He continued, "My mother said she has known about this for months, but nothing about it is adding up." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "So you're saying she might be wrong?" Ethan didn't answer immediately, and that silence gave me hope for the first time since the dinner. Then he said something very carefully. "I'm saying, I don't know what she's doing." That was it. Not belief in me yet, but doubt in her story. And that was the first crack in Linda's control. Something changed in me that moment. Not emotionally, not dramatically, but mentally. For the first time, I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing the situation as a system. Because manipulation only works when it stays unchallenged. I looked at Ethan. She didn't just misunderstand something. She built something. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "She didn't show you truth. She showed you a story that looks like truth." Ethan stayed quiet, but I could see something shifting inside him now. Understanding, slowly forming. I continued. "And the more we try to emotionally react, the more control she has." He nodded slowly. For the first time since everything started, we weren't breaking apart. We were thinking together. That night, I went deeper. I started reviewing every interaction I had with Linda over the past year. Every comment, every concern, every strange warning. And suddenly, I noticed a pattern. She never attacked directly. She always planted doubt first, then stepped back, and let others complete the destruction. It was never, "You are bad." It was always, "I just hope you know everything." Or, "I'm only saying this because I care." Or, "I don't want you to get hurt later." Every sentence was designed to feel safe. But the result was always the same. Distrust, distance, isolation. I whispered to myself, "She's been doing this the whole time." And that realization didn't just scare me. It changed something inside me permanently. Because now I knew. This wasn't about one dinner. This was a long-term strategy, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. Late that night, Ethan texted me. Just one line. "We need to talk about my mother." I stared at the message for a long time, because that sentence means only one thing. He was starting to question her, and once a child starts questioning a parent, everything changes, for better or for worse. I replied, "I'm ready." And as I hit send, I had no idea that the next conversation would reveal something far more dangerous than lies. It would reveal intention. Now the story is no longer about accusation. It is about investigation. And slowly, the truth behind Linda's manipulation is starting to surface. Ethan called me that evening again. This time, he didn't ask to meet. He asked me to come to his apartment. His voice sounded different. Not angry, not distant, but unsettled. Like something inside him was no longer stable. When I arrived, he opened the door immediately. No hesitation, no small talk, just a quiet nod that meant something serious is coming. We sat in his living room. No music, no distractions. Just two people sitting in a space filled with questions neither of us wanted to ask out loud. Finally, he spoke. "I talked to my mother." My chest tightened instantly. "What did she say?" He looked at me carefully. like he was trying to measure my reaction before continuing. She said you're going to deny everything no matter what. I felt a sharp frustration rise inside me. That's not an answer, Ethan. He nodded slowly. I know. Silence again. Then he added, but I also asked her about the man in the photos. My heartbeat slowed. And? Ethan exhaled. She avoided the question. That was the first real crack. Because avoidance is not innocence. It is strategy. I leaned forward. So she can't explain who he is? Ethan rubbed his face slowly. She says it doesn't matter. That the point is your past behavior, not details. I let out a bitter laugh. That's not how truth works. He looked at me, and I could see it now. He was stuck between two realities. The woman he trusted his entire life, and the woman he was about to marry. And both stories couldn't exist at the same time. That's what made this so dangerous. Ethan stood up and walked toward the window. I don't know what she's doing, he said quietly. But something feels off. I followed him with my eyes. That's because it is off. He turned back to me. And for the first time, he didn't argue. He just listened. I took a deep breath. Ethan, think logically for a second. He stayed silent. I continued. If I had a child in the past, there would be records, hospitals, schools, social media, friends, anything. He nodded slowly. I pressed further. But there is nothing, not even a trace of that man online. Ethan frowned. I checked too. And? He hesitated. Same result. That silence between us said everything. Because now it wasn't just me questioning Linda. It was both of us. And once that happens, control starts to weaken. Ethan sat back down slowly. His voice lowered. Do you think she made it up? I didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. Then I said carefully, I think she built something and hoped we wouldn't question it. Ethan looked down. For a long time he didn't speak. Then finally, why would she do that? That was the real question, and I didn't have the full answer yet. But something inside me already knew the direction. Control, fear of losing it, and something deeper, something personal. I looked at him. Your mother doesn't want you to lose me. He frowned. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully. She wants to control who you choose. Silence. Because now the pattern made sense. Every warning, every manipulation, every planted doubt. It was never random. It was selection control. She wasn't just trying to expose me. She was trying to remove me. Ethan walked back and forth in the room, thinking, processing, fighting internally. Then he stopped suddenly. She's been like this for years. I looked at him. He continued. I just never saw it this clearly. That line changed something between us. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about him finally seeing his own reality. And that is always painful. More painful than betrayal. More painful than lies. Because it forces you to question your entire past. Ethan sat down again, his voice quieter now. I remember moments where she would influence decisions. Subtle things. I never questioned it. I nodded slowly. Because you trusted her. He looked at me. And for the first time, he didn't defend her. He didn't protect her image. He just said, yes. That single word opened the door. Not fully, but enough. That night, something shifted. Not dramatically, but permanently. Ethan didn't ask me to leave. He didn't accuse me. He didn't defend his mother either. He was stuck in the middle. But now, he was finally aware of the middle. Before leaving, he said something that surprised me. "I want to find out what's really going on." I looked at him carefully. "This isn't just about me anymore." He nodded. "I know." Then he paused. "And I think my mother has been hiding things longer than I realized." That sentence changed everything, because now, we weren't just defending ourselves, we were investigating her. And that is the moment the balance shifts. 2 days later, Ethan called me early in the morning. His voice was different again. Focused, calm, controlled. "I found something." My heart immediately raced. "What?" He paused before speaking. "There was a file on my mother's old email account. Something she forgot to delete." I sat up instantly. "What kind of file?" Another pause. Then he said, "A name. And a hospital record from years ago." My breath stopped. "What name?" Ethan's voice lowered. And when he spoke again, everything I thought I understood about Linda started collapsing. "The same name from the photos." Silence. Then he added, "But it's not connected to you." My mind went blank. "What?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "It's connected to her." And in that moment, the truth stopped being about me and started becoming about her. The lie is no longer stable. The foundation is cracking. And now, we are getting closer to the real secret Linda has been hiding for years. Ethan didn't send me the file. He told me to come over. This time, his tone wasn't confused anymore. It was serious, controlled, like someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. When I arrived, he was already waiting with his laptop open. The room felt heavier than before. Not emotional heavy, but truth heavy, like something inside it was about to collapse. He looked at me and said, "Before I show you this, you need to stay calm." That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. "I don't think I can stay calm," I replied honestly. Ethan didn't smile. He just nodded. "I know." Then he turned the laptop toward me and opened the file. At first, it looked like medical records, old documents, hospital formatting, dates from years ago. But then I saw the name, Linda Miller. My heart slowed instantly. That wasn't her name from our family story. That wasn't what I knew her as. Ethan pointed at the screen. "This file is from 27 years ago." I frowned. "What is this?" He hesitated, then said, "She had a child." Silence. The room stopped moving. I stared at him, then at the screen again. "No, that's not possible." Ethan continued carefully. "She gave birth in a private hospital under a different identity record." My breath became uneven. "What are you saying?" He clicked another page. And there it was. A birth record. A child listed. And then a second document. An emergency transfer note. I couldn't process it properly. My mind kept rejecting it. But my eyes kept reading it. Ethan said quietly, "The child didn't survive." I felt my hands go cold, not because of shock alone, but because suddenly, her behavior made sense in a way I didn't want it to. The control, the manipulation, the obsession with family structure, the need to control relationships. I whispered, "She lost a child." Ethan nodded, but he didn't stop there. And after that, everything changed in her records, her identity, her history, even her marriage timeline. I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He turned another page, and my stomach dropped again. There were gaps, entire sections of her past rewritten, missing records, changed dates, disconnected timelines. It was like someone had rebuilt her entire life from scratch. and erased parts that hurt too much to keep. I sat down slowly, because my legs felt weak. So you're saying she's not stable? Ethan shook his head slightly. I'm saying she never healed. That sentence landed deeper than anything else, because it didn't excuse her, but it explained her. Ethan continued. People don't always process loss normally. Some people rebuild control instead of healing. I whispered. So she controls people because she lost control once. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Silence filled the room again, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt something more complicated, understanding, and fear. Because understanding someone like Linda doesn't make them less dangerous. It makes them more predictable, and predictability in someone unstable is still danger. Then Ethan said something that changed everything again. There's more. I looked up instantly. What else? He hesitated, then said, the man in the photos. Daniel Reeves. My heart tightened. What about him? Ethan turned the screen again and opened another document, a police report. I felt my breath stop. Ethan continued. He was never your past. I froze. What? He pointed at the file. He was connected to your mother. Silence. Complete silence. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe properly. Ethan explained slowly. Linda created that entire story using someone from her own past. Someone she once had a connection to. My mind refused to accept it. No. She used him against me? Ethan nodded. Yes. And suddenly everything snapped into place. The photos, the timing, the emotional manipulation, the confidence in her accusation. It wasn't random. It wasn't confusion. It was targeted. I stood up slowly, my voice shaking. So she didn't just lie about me. Ethan looked at me carefully. No. My breath hitched. She used someone from her past to build a fake story about me? Ethan nodded again. And that was the moment it hit me fully. This was not a misunderstanding. This was construction. Deliberate. Calculated. Cold. I sat back down. Because my body couldn't handle standing anymore. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I whispered, why would she do that to me? Ethan looked down and said quietly, because you represented something she couldn't control. That sentence stayed in the air, heavy, uncomfortable, real. Something changed inside me that night. Not emotional collapse, not sadness, something else. Clarity. Because once you understand the structure of manipulation, you stop seeing yourself as the center of it and start seeing the system. I looked at Ethan, my voice steadier now. So, what do we do now? He paused, then said, we stop reacting, and we start exposing. That word, exposing. It didn't feel like revenge yet, but it felt like movement. And for the first time since the rehearsal dinner, I wasn't just surviving the story. I was starting to step outside of it. The truth is no longer about accusations. It is about construction, history, and control. And now, Sarah is no longer just defending herself. She is beginning to understand the system behind her destruction. The morning of the wedding arrived like nothing had changed outside. Same sky, same sunlight, same city moving like life was normal. But inside me, nothing was normal anymore. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, wearing the wedding dress I had once dreamed about. White, simple, beautiful. But it didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like armor. Because today wasn't just a wedding. It was the day everything hidden was going to surface. Ethan had not slept. Neither had I. We had spent the entire night going through messages, files, timelines, trying to understand how deep Linda's manipulation went. And the more we uncovered, the clearer it became. This was never about misunderstanding. It was a long-term plan, a carefully built system of emotional control. And today, that system was going to break. He looked different, not tired, not confused, focused, like someone who had finally stopped being emotionally pulled in every direction. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Whatever happens today, don't react emotionally." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer. "That's what she wants. Emotional chaos, confusion, noise. The moment you break, she wins again." I swallowed hard. And what if she keeps lying? Ethan didn't hesitate. "Then we don't argue. We reveal." That word again. Reveal. Not fight. Not accuse. Reveal. Because truth, when structured properly, doesn't need shouting. It just needs timing. A large hall decorated with white flowers, soft golden lights, and rows of chairs filled with guests. People were smiling, taking pictures, talking about love. They had no idea they were walking into something else entirely, something far darker. I stood at the entrance for a moment, holding my bouquet. My hands were shaking slightly. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "Remember, stay calm." I nodded. But inside, I was anything but calm, because I could already feel it. Linda was here, somewhere in this room, waiting, watching, preparing, just like she always did. Guests stood up, whispers quieted, and I walked down the aisle, slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Ethan stood at the altar waiting, and for a brief second, everything felt almost real again, almost normal, almost safe. But then I saw her, Linda, sitting in the front row, smiling, not warmly, not kindly, but confidently, like she already knew how this story ended. And that smile, that was the moment I realized. She wasn't here to stop the wedding. She was here to control the ending. Words about love, commitment, trust. But I barely heard them, because I was watching Linda, and she was watching me back. Calm, collected, like nothing had changed since the rehearsal dinner disaster. But something had changed. I could feel it now. Ethan was different. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the guests, at the room, at everything. And I knew exactly why. This wasn't going to be an emotional confrontation. This was going to be public truth exposure. "If anyone has any objections..." Ethan raised his hand. The room went silent instantly. Not confusion, shock, because no groom does that. The officiant paused awkwardly. Ethan stepped forward slightly and looked at the entire room, then at Linda, and said something that changed everything. "Before this wedding continues, there's something everyone needs to hear." A wave of whispers spread instantly. Guests turned toward each other, confused, uneasy. Linda didn't move, but her smile faded slightly, just slightly. And I realized she didn't expect this. Not yet. Not like this. Pulled out his phone and looked at me for a brief second. Not for approval, but for alignment. I nodded, and that was it. He turned back to the crowd and said, "A few days ago, a lie was used to destroy trust in this room." The guests shifted uncomfortably. He continued, "That lie was about a child that never existed in the way it was described." Gasps, whispers, sudden tension. Linda finally stood up. Slowly. "This is inappropriate," she said firmly. But Ethan didn't stop. Instead, he looked directly at her and said, "No. What's inappropriate is what you did." Silence exploded through the hall. Every guest now fully focused. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the room to hear. Screens appeared, documents, emails, hospital records, names, dates, conflicting timelines. Confusion spread across faces instantly. Guests leaned forward, trying to understand, and slowly, the narrative Linda built started collapsing in real time. People were no longer reacting emotionally. They were analyzing, and analysis kills manipulation faster than anything else. Linda stepped forward, her voice sharper now. "This is taken out of context." But nobody reacted, because context was already being rebuilt in front of them. Ethan continued. "This story was constructed using false connections, manipulated records, and emotional pressure." A pause, then the final line. "And none of it was about truth." He looked directly at Linda. "It was about control." For the first time, I saw it. Not anger, not confidence, not strategy. Panic. Just a flicker. But enough. Linda stepped forward quickly, her voice louder now. "You are all misunderstanding." But someone from the guests interrupted. "Then explain the records." Another voice. "And the messages." Another. "Why would you do this before a wedding?" The room was no longer on her side. It had shifted. Slowly. Completely. And that's when Linda realized something terrifying. She wasn't controlling the room anymore. The wedding is no longer a celebration. It has become a public exposure stage. And Linda is losing control for the first time. The silence after Ethan's words didn't last long, because silence never survives when truth enters a room. First it was whispers, then questions, then open confrontation. Guests were no longer confused spectators. They were witnesses. And Linda was no longer the center of control. She was the center of scrutiny. I stood beside Ethan, watching everything unfold like a storm finally finding its target. Linda tried to regain control. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and spoke again, calmer this time but forced. "This is a misunderstanding created to sabotage this wedding." But nobody nodded. Nobody agreed. That small shift, that lack of support, was louder than any argument. Ethan stepped forward again. His voice stayed steady. "There is no misunderstanding. There is evidence." And he looked at the guests. Multiple independent records confirm the same timeline inconsistencies. A murmur spread again. This time not confusion, but acceptance of logic. And logic is something manipulation cannot survive. Linda turned toward me suddenly, her eyes sharper now, not emotional anymore, strategic again. "Sarah, tell them this is not true." Every head turned toward me. The old tactic. Pull me back into emotional chaos. Make me react. Make me defend. Make me collapse. Because if I collapse, she regains the narrative. But something inside me had already changed. I looked at her, and I didn't speak immediately. That pause alone changed everything. Then I said quietly, "I don't need to prove myself anymore." A ripple went through the room, because that wasn't defense. That was detachment. Linda blinked, just once. That was the first real crack in her expression. Ethan continued presenting information, not aggressively, not emotionally, just structured truth. Screens showed inconsistencies, emails showing manipulation patterns, witness confirmations, timeline mismatches. Every piece wasn't dramatic on its own, but together, they formed something undeniable, a pattern. And patterns are impossible to argue with. Guests started whispering things like, "This doesn't add up. She planned this. There's too much detail for coincidence." Linda noticed it, and for the first time, she stepped back slightly, just a small step, but it mattered, because control is not loud. Control is positioning, and she was losing position. Then one guest spoke loudly. "Why would you do this to your own family?" That question hit harder than any accusation, because it wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about motive. Linda froze, just for a second. And in that second, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not manipulation. Pain. Deep, buried pain. but she covered it quickly. Too quickly. I was protecting my son. But her voice wasn't strong anymore. It was thinner, less certain. Ethan looked at her and said quietly, "No, you were controlling him." That sentence landed like a final verdict. The room reacted instantly, not loudly, but collectively. A shift, a realization, the kind that cannot be reversed. Linda looked around the room. Guests no longer trusted her tone. They were no longer following her narrative. They were analyzing her behavior. And that's when she understood. She was alone in the story she created. Her voice rose slightly. "You are all being manipulated against me." But no one responded. Not even her allies. Because there were no allies left. Only witnesses. And truth had already replaced fear. She turned toward Ethan again. "You are choosing her over your own mother?" Ethan paused, long enough for everyone to feel it. Then he said, "I am choosing truth over control." That was the final break. I stepped forward slowly. All eyes turned to me. But this time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like space. For the first time in the entire story, I was not reacting. I was speaking. I looked at Linda and said calmly, "You didn't just try to stop a wedding." A pause. "You tried to rewrite a person's identity." The room went still. Even breathing felt louder now. I continued. "And when that didn't work, you tried to make everyone believe a version of me that never existed." Linda didn't interrupt this time. She just watched. Because she knew. This wasn't something she could interrupt anymore. I finished. "But I'm still here. And I'm still real." Silence. Then something unexpected happened. A guest stood up. Then another. Then another. Not cheering. Not dramatic. Just acknowledgement. Reality reclaiming itself. Linda looked at Ethan one last time. Her voice softer now. Almost broken. "I only did what I thought was right." Ethan didn't react emotionally. He replied simply, "No. You did what you needed to stay in control." That sentence ended everything, because it removed justification, removed emotion, removed excuse. Only truth remained. Linda looked down for the first time. No argument left. No narrative left. No control left. Just silence. The wedding is no longer a ceremony. It is a full public truth collapse. And Linda has finally lost control of everything she built. No one asked for the ceremony to continue. No one even remembered it was supposed to be a wedding anymore. The altar, the flowers, the soft music, everything that was meant to represent love, now felt like a stage where something much bigger had collapsed. Guests slowly began sitting back down, not in celebration, but in quiet disbelief. Some were still processing. Some were whispering. Some were just staring at Linda, as if trying to understand how someone could build something so carefully and still lose it in minutes. Ethan stepped away from the altar. He didn't look at anyone. Not at me. Not at her. Just forward. Like something inside him had finally stopped spinning. I followed him slowly. Not as a bride. Not as a victim. Just as someone walking out of a story that no longer belonged to either of us. No one stopped Linda when she started walking. That was the most powerful part. Not shouting. Not dragging. Not confrontation. Just space. Space where control used to exist. She walked down the aisle slowly. Every step quieter than the last. No confidence in her posture anymore. No performance left. Just a woman walking out of a room that no longer believed her version of reality. And for the first time, she didn't look like someone who was dangerous. She looked like someone who had lost something they never processed. But that didn't undo the damage. It only explained it. The venue didn't know what to do next. Staff stood awkwardly at the sides. Guests slowly began leaving in groups. No celebration photos, no applause, just confusion turning into silence. I sat on one of the front chairs, still holding my bouquet. But now it felt meaningless. Not because I lost the wedding, but because I understood something deeper. My life had been pulled into someone else's emotional wound, and I had almost been buried inside it. Ethan sat beside me after a few minutes. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he said quietly, "It's over." I looked at him, and for the first time in days, there was no confusion in his eyes, only clarity. I should have felt relief, but I didn't feel light. I felt empty. Because when a lie collapses publicly, it doesn't instantly become peace. It becomes silence. And silence is heavy. I whispered, "What happens now?" Ethan took a slow breath. "Now we rebuild everything she damaged." I nodded slowly, but something in me knew. Not everything can be rebuilt the same way. Because some versions of people die in moments like this. Not physically, but emotionally. And neither of us were the same anymore. Later that evening, we met outside the venue. The sky was darker now. Guests were gone. Cars had left. Only empty space remained. Ethan stood next to me and said, "I need to distance myself from her completely for a while." I understood immediately. Not anger, not rejection, processing, healing, breaking cycles. I nodded. "I understand." He looked at me carefully. "But I don't want to lose you." That sentence hit differently now. Because after everything, it didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a choice. And choices are different after truth exposure. I took a moment before answering. "We don't go back to what we were." He nodded slowly. "I know." A pause. Then he added, "But maybe we can become something real." That wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was honest. And honesty was the only thing that survived this story. 2 days later, I received a message. Unknown number. No introduction. Just one line. "You didn't win. You just changed the outcome." I stared at it for a long time. Not afraid. Not angry. Just aware. Because people like Linda don't see collapse as ending. They see it as interruption. And interruptions can return. But this time, I didn't respond emotionally. I simply deleted the message. Not out of fear, but out of control. For the first time, I chose silence. People think revenge is loud, public, explosive. But what I learned was different. Real revenge in situations like this isn't destruction. It is exposure. It is clarity. It is removing illusion until only truth remains. And when truth stands alone, there is nothing left to manipulate. Linda didn't lose because she was shouted down. She lost because her system stopped being believed. And belief is the only power she ever had. The truth has fully surfaced. The wedding is gone. The illusion is broken. And what remains is not destruction, but awareness. 3 weeks after the wedding that never became a wedding, life didn't return to normal. It returned to something quieter, something unfamiliar, something honest. I moved out of the apartment I had planned to build a married life in, not because I was running away, but because every corner of it still carried echoes of what happened. Truth has a strange effect. It doesn't just expose people, it redefines spaces, and I needed space that belonged only to me. Ethan and I met one last time before everything settled, not as a couple planning a future, not as victims of a shared storm, but as two people who had survived the same collapse. He looked calmer than before, not because everything was fixed, but because he had accepted what couldn't be undone. He said, "I'm going to step away from my family completely for now." I didn't react emotionally. I just listened. He continued. Not out of hate, but because I need to understand who I am without her control in my head. That sentence felt important. Because sometimes breaking away is not revenge, it's recovery. I nodded. I think you should. He looked at me for a long moment. And you? I took a breath. I'm going to rebuild my life, without living in anyone's shadow again. That was the first time I said it out loud. And it felt real. There was no dramatic ending for Linda. No arrest. No public downfall. No cinematic punishment. Just silence. She withdrew from public presence. Stopped attending events. Stopped social engagement. But what I understood later was simple. People like her don't disappear. They retreat. Because control doesn't die easily. It waits. But I was no longer inside her system, and that changed everything. For a long time I thought the story was about betrayal, or manipulation, or revenge. But I was wrong. It was about something deeper. Unhealed pain passing through control. A person who never processed loss, trying to control love so nothing could be lost again. But in doing so, she created loss everywhere she touched, and I became one of those losses she couldn't control. Months later, I started working again. Not in the same office, not in the same routine. Something new, something smaller, but mine. No whispers behind my back, no suspicion in the air, no one questioning my identity. Just work, just life, just me. And slowly, that became enough. I saw Ethan once more after several months. It was unplanned. A coffee shop. Simple, quiet. No tension, no confusion, just recognition. He smiled slightly. You look different. I smiled back. So do you. And it was true. We weren't the same people who stood at that altar. We weren't the same people who collapsed under someone else's story. We had both stepped out of it. He said, Do you ever think about it? I paused, then answered honestly. Not as pain anymore. Just as a lesson. He nodded. Me too. And that was it. No reopening wounds, no emotional pull, just closure. Real closure. Walking back from that cafe, I realized something important. Revenge is not always about destruction. Sometimes it is about clarity. About refusing to live inside someone else's narrative. About choosing yourself after being rewritten. And the most powerful ending is not when the villain falls. It is when they no longer define your story. I looked at the city lights that night, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a character in someone else's story. I felt like the author of my own, and that was enough.